A spontaneous and unrehearsed interview.
Hello and welcome to the 74th episode of Curiosityness. I am Travis DeRose, the host of the show, and this is where we talk about stuff that we're all curious about. And this episode definitely qualifies for that. I have on Heidi Neilson and Doug Paulson, and they have created something called the Menu for Mars. So if you're curious about going to Mars and you're ready to go, this is what you're going to be eating there. That's what we talk about. It's really interesting to think about this stuff because you think about it a bit, like what the hell are people going to eat on Mars? But Heidi and Doug really dig into it, and we talk about, what the first food is going to kind of be like, and it's going to be freeze-dried stuff, and then what's the first stuff we're kind of going to grow, and then how is cooking going to be different on Mars with less gravity and things like that. Even how you're going to dine and what food is going to mean to you. Is it going to mean the same thing culturally as it does here on Earth? Is it going to mean the same thing on Mars? So it's really fascinating. I think you're going to like this episode. So sit back, relax, and here is the Menu from Mars with Heidi Neilson and Doug Paulson right now. And boom. Good morning. Hello, Heidi and Doug. What's going on, guys?
Good morning. How's it going?
Doing good. I mean, is it morning for you guys there still?
It seems like morning, but it's actually about 1 o'clock or so. We're in New York City.
Right. Man, well, thanks for being on. Let's talk about the Menu for Mars. Well, first of all, I guess, what is Menu for Mars? Can you kind of give me a rundown of what we're running out here?
The way that we often describe it is that it's sort of a citizen's experiment in trying to visualize and taste what food might be like on Mars, and that's the short of it. And it didn't begin like that. It developed into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we started out. Our kind of long form title is Menu for Mars Supper Club, and so we started out with going out to dinner essentially with groups of people around New York City and really looking at what the menu was like at various restaurants around the city and really thinking about how that food would be adapted to Mars. So it's kind of like this riff of a thought experiment over dinner. And, so, yeah.
And each time we would visit like a restaurant, we would bring someone with us, someone who had like relevant expertise to thinking about food or life on Mars, and just kind of have like a dinner conversation.
Yeah, and we chose the restaurants based on cuisines based in countries that have some kind of space program. But because there's so many different, ways in which people can get be active in the space environment now, that could almost be anywhere.
Right.
Any kind of.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we'd go out to dinner and then we'd sort of review what the conditions are on Mars, and so we kind of like set the stage in a way, and then we'd think about, actually just go through the menu and order food and eat, and then talk to our expert and just kind of like have general conversations about what all that meant.
Wow, like meaning like how this would translate if we were on Mars?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, would you actually be able to eat this food on Mars? And if so, what kind of adaptations would you there would be some adaptation, and so what would those be? Or, yeah.
Man, that's awesome. I love how that got started. So, and then when you're doing this initial stuff, like, who are these experts, I guess, and how did you kind of find them?
Well, we first sort of like just started from the beginning and like reached out to people we know. I mean, we spoke to gardeners and compost people, nutritionists. I mean, just really trying to think about what it would take to just reboot planet Earth in a way, somewhere far away, in really hostile conditions. And, we live in New York City. And around here, we have people who are turning, empty lots into gardens.
Yeah.
And it's a really similar thought process.
Yeah, and so a lot of, what goes into that is things like composting. So somebody looking at, who knows a ton about composting, or somebody who knows a lot about who's looked into eating insects, for example, because we were thinking about alternate sources of protein. About maybe we were speculating that people on Mars wouldn't be able to have any meat, for example. I mean, the only meat that would be there would be preserved meat from Earth. So how would you, what other sources of protein might you grow on Mars, for example? So so crickets and mealworms and stuff like that. Yeah. So one of our dinners out involved supplementing some dim sum with crickets and mealworms, toasted crickets and mealworms.
Right. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, that's stuff that, is obvious. Of course, we would, how are we going to get protein and stuff? You can't have it'd be tough to have a bunch of cows or something up there on Mars. So how are we going to figure that out? So that's cool. So that kind of, I guess, what's kind of the first food on Mars going to be like when we kind of first arrive there?
Our starting point in our experiment is imagining that containers of dried goods and thermostabilized foods are waiting there. They've been sent there already. We know where they are. They've landed. They're intact, and now humans can go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when we took all of our research and built the Menu for Mars kitchen, we filled the pantry full of those kinds of ingredients. And, imagining that you get there and you have to eat several times a day before you can plant a garden and before you can try to create an ecosystem there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we were thinking that, on the International Space Station, when people first were, on Mars, mostly what they'd eat are MREs, prepackaged, complete cooked meals that would be mostly you'd open up a bag and then more or less heat up that bag and eat out of directly something that's already prepared. So and we were setting up our kitchen, we were thinking that it would be positioned something 6 months or a year into people living on Mars, where they might have opportunity every now and then to actually cook something from these prepared ingredients that would be sent ahead of time. So it'd be they'd be eating mostly the MREs or whatever, but they would be experimenting with special events. Hey, it's somebody's birthday. Let's try to, make a birthday cake, or, macaroni and cheese, or some special food that would evoke home or invoke some kind of celebration or whatever. So there would be, so it'd be experimental. Yeah.
Okay. And then what is a MRE? You mentioned that a couple times.
Oh, meal ready to eat. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So is that kind of similar? Is that kind of essentially what astronauts are having right now?
Yeah, exactly. So, there's a whole test kitchens and meal preparation services that set up in advance exactly what astronauts are going to eat on the space station, and they send up those foods that are already vacuum formed, thermostabilized vacuum formed packets of food that I think they're specifically set up for individuals. I think that they, astronauts will taste food ahead of time and make sure that the food is something that they will like and enjoy, that they're not sending somebody a food that's not what they're into, or not something that they would eat, to make sure that everybody is excited about eating.
Yeah, no, that's nice of them to think of that, because that could be a real bummer. You're floating in space and you get a can of pickles and you hate pickles,
Yeah, exactly. And also that everybody's getting, the right number of calories and the right nutritional balance and all that stuff too. So, So yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. That would just be kind of the initial stuff, and then you said for experimentation and stuff would start to come for kind of special events and things like that, where what they're trying to make certain things with the ingredients that they have sent to them, or is this where they're actually starting to, grow things or something on Mars?
Yeah, it'd be a little of both. Yeah, so it'd be like, okay, hey, we have a little downtime, after our work shifts or whatever. Let's try to make a meal together, or let's start on that garden that let's start growing things so we have something fresh to celebrate with later, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of like the point in I don't know, some kind of habitat or society that we were thinking.
I see. Okay. And then, so what does growing something on Mars look like? What does that entail?
For our purposes, we imagine that they would bring, that the first colonists would bring with them the most hardy, resilient, and weeds and things that they can get their hands on. And we're thinking about the kind of foods that grow in again in urban spaces that don't need a lot of water, that are resistant to harsh environments. When you see these renderings of off-world greenhouses and these lush tomatoes and stuff like that growing, they are compelling images, but Mars we don't think has. Yeah, they would require so much water. Yeah, those things would require so much water. And so we were thinking that what grows under just really adverse conditions? So, what would grow under, poor soil, or soil that's, the Martian regolith isn't soil. It doesn't have any nutrients for the plant. So you'd have to, figure out that to begin with. So what kind of plants would grow in that environment? And we were thinking, well, weeds, but there are a lot of things people eat what we call weeds now, dandelions, for example. What are other examples? Yeah, and we also have mushrooms. So we had a whole system of growing mushrooms in our kitchen, thinking that would be a nice, fresh way of, I don't know, having a fresh ingredient.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you could eat, dandelions and weeds and stuff like that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, weeds is just kind of like a slang term for a plant that grows really fast in poor conditions, and so they tend to, right? So but they're plenty good to eat. A lot of them. Yeah, dandelions are the ones that come. I think mustard seeds also grow really well under poor conditions. I can't quite remember, but a lot of different kinds. So we were growing. Dandelion.
Okay, interesting. I see. And then, so that would be kind of the first things that we would hope to grow there and have to eat and stuff. But what would continue along that timeline or spectrum? Would more things continue to grow? Would we get to tomatoes and things like that?
I think it all depends on water and where it comes from. The cost of getting, and I actually forget the number, but the cost of getting things off of planet Earth is so enormous that's one of the huge limitations when thinking about a colony off-world. And one thought is to find ice that's already out there, find ice that's on a comet or on a meteor or on a moon. And for that, so much of the idea of recreating life like we have here on Earth somewhere else hinges on that problem.
So, yeah, so what are the, kind of the conditions on Mars that we're kind of looking at where, we may not have any water? What are kind of the other, challenges, I guess, that we're looking at when we get there?
Yeah, totally. So, the first, we kind of, initially when we were going out to dinners, the supper club would meet and we'd actually go over the main points of the conditions. So I'll just go over those. So it's cold. So it's super cold, and so it's like 80 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit in winter. And so it's basically really, really cold. It almost, at its warmest, it gets up to what is pretty cold here on Earth. So it's extremely low atmospheric pressure. So if you go outside without a pressurized spacesuit, your blood will boil.
Yes.
The air is super toxic with carbon dioxide. So it's completely toxic to both plants and animals. It has way too much carbon dioxide. There's less sunlight, but more UV radiation. So, it's farther away from the sun, but there's really a thin atmosphere. And so the UV radiation is higher there. It has only about 40% of Earth's gravity. So we don't know what the effects of like 40% gravity. I mean, there's microgravity studies from the International Space Station, but not what partial gravity is. And then the seasons. So Mars has seasons like Earth does, but they last about twice as long because a Martian year is like almost 2 Earth years. So the season, so winter would be, 6 months or something. And also the distance. So to get from Mars to Earth, the communication transmissions are delayed 3 minutes to 22 minutes, depending on, where both the planets are in relation to each other.
Right.
So you wouldn't actually be able to have like a regular conversation like we're having now. It would be super delayed. And then also, maybe most importantly, dust. There's like tons and tons of dust. The kind of dust, it sticks to everything electrostatically. And so that means that you'd have it all over, it'd stick to everything. There would be issues with air filters or water purifiers, or anytime there's like a gasket, like an air seal gasket, that would constantly get stuck with dust. And so you'd have to be constantly cleaning those off. Also with like solar panels, the Mars rovers and stuff always get dust on their solar panels, which, affects obviously the amount of power you're generating. And there's also huge dust storms. So sometimes they'll last like a whole year.
Good God. Okay. So it's not a paradise up there.
Yeah, and so we were talking about all about food, about how all those conditions translate into food. So you'd be living in an entirely sealed spaceship-like environment, including any greenhouses. So it would have to be pressurized, right? The cooking methods that you use, you'd have to cook because of the low atmospheric pressure, you'd have to cook with a pressure cooker or with an induction cooker or something like that. And you wouldn't be able to have any flames because of the mixture of the air with inside the habitat. So all the food from Earth would be really preserved. So packaged for about a 5-year shelf life, which is crazy long. For example, the food that is up on the International Space Station is packaged for a 2-year shelf life. So this would be much longer than that. So fresh food would be super limited. And we were also thinking that, aside from the mushrooms or weedy plants, people might figure out ways of using algae. Because it would grow quickly and whatever, and be compatible with keeping water or something. And also we were thinking about whether the dust would have a certain flavor because it would get in everything, right? So, how would that affect the cooking and the flavoring of everything?
Yeah, that's a good point. Are you gonna taste or feel the texture of that dust everywhere, right?
Yeah, you sure are. I think you probably wear down teeth too.
Yeah. Jeez. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. And then so let's talk. Well, I want to ask about the. You mentioned the different. You couldn't really have a flame, cooking. So your cooking methods would have to be different, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like a flame is really interesting. Like on the International Space Station where there's just microgravity. Have you ever seen those pictures of like a candle or like a candle comparison between a candle flame on Earth and a candle flame in microgravity?
I think I have, yes.
Yeah, it's like the one, so a candle, it has kind of that shape that is pretty vertical, but a candle in microgravity is like a sphere around. Okay. Yeah, so it doesn't go up. There's no there's no smoke or whatever going up. It's just kind of this sphere that's like burning out from the wick or whatever. So anyway, gravity does affect how flames burn, so therefore it would be really potentially dangerous. And also the mixture of air that is breathable might be different, and so might have more oxygen concentration and therefore be more burn faster, so it might be really dangerous.
I see.
So no barbecuing is the point.
Right. Okay. And then it would just be like induction cooktops and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's what we were thinking.
It seems like what you would use, I guess. Okay. And then, I guess that's what you would heat with. I mean, would you still have like microwaves or things like that?
What we were guessing so, mm-hmm. Right, Doug? Mm-hmm. We were trying to do some microwave cooking, baking by microwave, which is kind of weird. Like the bread, like cakes and stuff turn out sort of foamy.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Would an oven be there, or would it just be microwaves?
I mean, excellent question. Yeah, I mean, like there's ways of making kind of an oven thing, like a double boiler, kind of like stovetop oven. So it seems like there would be ways of working around that if you didn't have an actual flame that you could use to heat it with. So there, be oven-like things.
Okay,
right,
yeah. Man, okay, interesting. And then, so, talking about the dust in your food and everything, and tasting that everywhere, would that, that would be in the soil that you're using to grow, the weeds or mustard plants or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that seems like would be critical to start trying to create is soil, like trying to use the regolith and make it into something that's more like soil. And as far as flavor, we were talking about peroxide. Well, we apparently, so on the moon, when the astronauts landed on the moon, many of them commented about the smell of the moon, about it smelling kind of like gunpowder. And one of the experts that we talked about at our supper club meetings is Arlen Krotz, and he wrote a whole book about basically everything about the moon. And he speculated that the moon would taste a lot like peroxide, and like they would have sort of a persistent peroxide-like taste or smell or flavor to it. So we actually tasted some peroxide when we were out to dinner once.
Huh.
But it tasted
yeah, it's awful.
It was really awful.
Yeah, I can imagine. It doesn't sound appetizing. Man, okay. So what would be like the kind of the, I mean, I guess we're just kind of guessing here, but kind of like the dining experience and on Mars be like, and how would it relate to kind of what it is here on Earth, and how we like kind of culturally all, sit down for events, around a dinner table and stuff like that?
I mean, I think that's like one of the really important questions around this. And like, imagine taking so much of the joy out of food, because if it's tasting bad and you've had it 1,000 times and it's not fresh,
it's gritty
and tastes like peroxide, then imagine that you and your collaborators are living in like the fuselage of an airplane the rest of your life. I mean, it's really it really points to like this need, like this sort of cultural need to like preserve and reimagine the social ingredients of food, and to take that with you to Mars, but also to invent new things. And I think that's like one of the real questions around what life would be like there. How to bring joy back into this, how to bring joy back into food, how to bring joy back into those kind of encounters with the people that you are fully dependent on.
Mm-hmm.
Like we, as far as like the types of food we tried, Indian food, we tried dim sum, we tried Russian, we tried a lot of different things. We experimented with like different like Native American ways to preserve meat. We tried mushrooms and crickets and things, and in our findings, we found that Ethiopian food might be the most suited for life on Mars.
Oh.
So then for a couple of reasons. One is like what we're talking about with sharing, in Ethiopian food, you have a central plate. I mean, for one thing, would there be a dinner table? Like what would that dinner table be made out of? Like what material would actually that consist of? Like a wall of the spaceship, so I mean, who knows? But anyway, it has like a central plate that everybody eats from together. So that might be kind of critical. And also eating with your hands, like there wouldn't necessarily be any silverware or, because again, that kind of material takes a lot of weight to get to Mars. So would you actually have silverware, or maybe they would have made it or had it, somehow have to make it on site.
But also like the food itself is like, it's easy to be vegan in Ethiopian,
and it has strong flavors. That would mask the weird tastes. So
yeah. No, that's great. That's interesting that you found that Ethiopian food can be kind of the, maybe a good a model to go after with the way they eat, and also those, and meaning that it's easy to be vegan, meaning to get enough like nutrients from their types of food.
Yeah. So no meat. The base foods that Ethiopian food is made from, like lentils and so on, are relatively easy to preserve for a long time. So we were thinking that would plausibly be something that people would have on hand.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they would preserve for a long time, and you could make it, and it would be like warm and communal and tasty, relatively speaking.
Right. Relatively speaking, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So is there like, is there thoughts to, I don't know, growing, because there's like the Impossible meat and beef and all that stuff you see. Is there thoughts to kind of creating something like that up on Mars?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, depending on the ingredients, again, like I think that the main limit is water. Working with food that doesn't take a lot of water to grow.
Yeah, and energy. I mean, like, I don't really know how exactly the Impossible burgers or those things are made, but it seems like it would take a lot of processing and potentially a lot of energy to make it. And so that might not be something that they can afford. Mm-hmm. To, that level of processing, right?
Right, yeah. Man, yeah, I'm beginning to see it's like it's hard to shift my mindset a bit, because just like you said, even with silverware, it's like, well, silverware is heavy. Like, how do they get it there? Like, what are you going to be eating with? There's so much stuff that you just kind of take for granted here that we just have. You really have to rethink everything, including water and energy and stuff like that. So I'm glad you guys are thinking about this.
Yeah. That's one of like beyond Ethiopian food and stuff, I mean, one of the main takeaways, which is just like perfectly evident from the start of this kind of experiment, is that Earth is great for us.
Yeah, we're like so suited for here.
We're really well suited for Earth, and we like it here.
Yeah. So you can go outside without a spacesuit and like walk around.
It's nice, yeah.
Breathe, Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we were made for it here,
Like it's as if we were made for it here.
Yeah.
So do you guys have kind of a vision of what the ideal, I don't know, colony on Mars would look like in relation to food? Like would it just be similar to, what we have here on Earth, where the food tastes good and it's relatively easy to get, and it's fun to eat and kind of get around and make it an experience? Is that kind of the goal there, or what are you guys shooting for, I guess?
Well, I think part of what the Supper Club, the sort of ethic of the Supper Club, is to kind of put those questions to the people, to the participants. And then when we built the Menu from Mars kitchen and just sort of extended an open invitation for anyone to come to the kitchen and invent a recipe with these Mars feasible ingredients, I think that's what this project is about. It's about like putting it out there for other people to take that on. And so many of those decisions get made in offices in NASA somewhere, or in Mars One. And I think that's part of what this project is really about. It's about, let's put that question out there. Here are the constraints. Here are the limitations. Here are the possibilities. Let's try it.
And part of too about going out to dinner in New York City and tasting cuisines from around the world was thinking about food migration in the first place. Like, so like food, for example, from Vietnam. Vietnam is far away and probably grows plants that, like, the food sourcing from, if you're in Vietnam, is going to be very different than the food sourcing in New York City. And so have people in New York adapted the cuisine to not only fit the food sourcing that they can get in New York, but also the tastes of people here. So they might actually already be changing the flavor profile to better fit people, the audience in this place. So I guess it's all about thinking about like the food on Mars in the future as being something potentially entirely different than what we can really imagine right now. It might be not something that, it might be totally based on algae that to our flavor profile would taste terrible. But if you're used to, the weird peroxide and dust and so on, that would be a really great thing. People growing up in a completely different environment would have a completely different taste profile. And so just sort of remembering that and thinking about, I don't know, kind of reflecting on our current condition here.
Huh. Yeah, that makes sense, I guess, because you just kind of, whatever you grow up eating and stuff, is what kind of you probably tend to like. So if people grow up on Mars loving that Martian dust, that may be what they prefer, even.
There would be like Martian dust connoisseurs, Yeah. Like there's better taste Martian dust from like different places in the, on the planet. And so like the ones higher up on, the mountain ranges or deeper in the caverns, like have a different flavor that you might sprinkle on your whatever.
Right. Yeah. This one's a little more oaky and yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's awesome. That's so fun to think about. I love this stuff. So, so we talked about the Supper Club, but I think we need to hear about, your test kitchen and everything, like how you guys kind of put that together and what exactly that is.
The test kitchen was it kind of became evident during the supper club that we needed to kind of make time and make space to try to implement all the things we were learning about and all the conversations that were happening. One of the things that has made this project really work is that it really does speak to really divergent interests, and it like brings together artists and foodies and scientists and sci-fi buffs. I mean, it really appeals to lots of different sensibilities. And we built this kind of, the Mars Kitchen was this kind of inflated bubble that is trying to help us visualize what life would be like inside of a closed world, and fill it full of Mars feasible ingredients like dried things. Had a garden, had compost, had crickets, had made space for experiments with like growing, experiments with cooking. And it came with an open invitation for anyone to come in, whether they're part of the supper club or just someone off the street, to come in and develop a dish and cook something. And we collected all those different inventions and recipes into a kind of a really wild and sculptural cookbook that has recipes and pages that are actually like vacuum sealed food experiments and reviews by the other participants who are like reviewing the.
Yeah, so everybody would taste each other's food and then like write a food review.
Okay.
And with a star system.
Nice. Oh, that's cool. So it's just kind of it's allowing people to use, what will probably be available to them up in Mars and, see what is possible to create. So how are those dishes? Did you guys get to try some of them?
Oh yeah, we tried most of them. Yeah. Not all.
It's like there's a mix. There's just definitely like a mix of things. I mean, I think like some of it is stuff that we actually cook all the time, like rice and beans. At least when I make it at home, I'm adding water and I'm bringing it to a boil, and that would be the same on Mars. Other things where we're trying to do like nachos and stuff, where we're working with like dried like powdered cheeses and sour creams and stuff like that, is when it starts to get a little bit weird.
Yeah, and we also noticed that like cooking together, like when I'm cooking with friends or whatever, a lot of what's social about it is like chopping up all the vegetables, like somebody washing and chopping vegetables and then is like doing all the prep work. And we realized that there wasn't that. There were no vegetables to chop, and so it was just kind of like standing around like mixing a little bit of water into like a powder, like trying to reconstitute a powder, like that sort of thing. So it was like a very different kind of, I don't know, social experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Just like, the way that you prepare things, it's less social even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that sounds awesome. Is that kitchen still around, or is that gone now?
It was up for about a month, and so it's not. It was never meant to be a permanent installation. So it was at an art space in Brooklyn. So we're hoping to do some kind of thing, another type of installation like that, but maybe a different spin on it, like a cafe or something like that.
Yeah, that would be cool. Man, that's so awesome though that you guys got to do that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really, really fun.
It definitely had a life of its own, and a lot of us are thinking about Mars right now. A lot of us are thinking about environmental issues. This experiment, as food things often do, just really brought together people with really different interests and made a space for people to kind of come face to face with each other and suspend their disbelief and try this.
Yeah.
And it was like, the project really took a life of its own.
Yeah, and food is a nice way that people can relate to something like, or feel like they have something to contribute to I don't know, the future. So, not all of us are like rocket scientists or it's hard for us to jump in and discuss something like, well, how do we get something to land on the planet, or how do we, anyway, deep engineering questions, but food is all of us kind of know how to do, or at least, we can all probably make pancakes or boil eggs or whatever, the basic survival stuff.
And have opinions about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, it sounds extremely fun. So what's what now? Do we have a pretty good understanding of, how to get started with food and stuff on Mars? Is the next step just to go there and start doing this stuff? Or is there more experimentation and thought that needs to go into this?
It's such a huge unknown that, we could think about it and play with it and experiment with it infinitely until we're there.
Yeah.
And it's like going to be some huge problems that we never thought of.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, to us, I think it's all, it is about trying to envision what food is like on Mars, but it's all about really appreciating food on Earth. It's about like kind of seeing our own place here and appreciating what we've got, rather than, really thinking that the future there would be so awesome, because really what we have here is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty good here. Got lots of food, tastes good, easy to get.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, life's good. Okay, wow, that's interesting. So just to kind of shift the perspective that, life here is pretty good, and you can walk outside and your blood won't boil.
Totally.
Exactly.
Man, well, This was great. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this stuff, guys. I love thinking about these kinds of things. So this is awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, of course. So where should we send folks if they want to kind of learn more about what they're going to be eating on Mars?
Menuformars.net.
Perfect. Cool. Well, I will have a link for folks to click on for that and check all that stuff out. And we'll get some pictures of the test kitchen and everything too for folks to check out. So
excellent.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Heidi and Doug. Appreciate it again, and have a good one. All right.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for sticking around and listening. Hoping that you found that fun and interesting. Thank you to Doug and Heidi for being on and sharing all that info. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it, and it helps the show out a lot if you shared it with your friends and family, someone you think might find this interesting. And you can find us on Instagram at Curiosityness podcast. That's where I do most of the stuff, and I'll have some photos of the Mars kitchen that Heidi and Doug have there. But that's it. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in episode 75. Bye.